All right, everybody, welcome to another hangout with us here on the Treasury team. Donnie Gupton, I'm excited to be back with you guys. Missed you last week, so it's going through a move, but today we've got a very fun episode in front of you here. We've got our guest, Priscila Nagalli from Actualize Consulting. She's the Director of Treasury and Capital Markets. Thank you, Priscila, for joining us crazy dudes today.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Priscila, can I just start things off? I think all the guests are eager to hear a little bit about your background. Now, what we love about your background is you've worked in the banking side, you've gone to the corporate side, and now you're working in the consulting advisory, implementation space. So just to recap for the listeners, you started off in banking at Citi and ABN, and then moved to State Street. And then you moved across to the corporate side with CPP Investments, Brother, and ICM CP. And now you're working with Actualize. So maybe just start by giving us a quick little summary of your background.
Sure. Yeah. So I went to school for I'm an economist, and my first internship was at Citibank, where then I further got promoted there and continued. It's a very different environment, I should say, from corporate and consulting. Banking, they're big, there's hundreds of people doing, and then as you move from one bank to the other, they're almost doing the same thing over and over, so just changing really the flag. That became a little bit old for me at some point, and I was servicing CPPIB, which is the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. So it's really they're managing the federal pension fund in Canada. And that really gave me a good view of being a practitioner. I worked there for 7 years, really having progressing roles through Treasury. We started issuing commercial paper. We developed very strong hedging structures for currencies, and just really everything about Treasury funding. And we were managing over 30 currencies. So that gave me a good breadth of Treasury. Also, I think working for an institution that is their goal is to help the elderly, the retired. So that gave me a purpose. That's really what drove me to continue there. Then through my husband's work, we got transferred to the US, and I worked at Brother for close to a year. And I was called by a consulting firm, Actualize. And I think the sense of purpose really hit harder for me, because my day to day, I'm really helping corporates and individuals to succeed on their processes and what they do. So I think I've been around for 22 years, and I've seen a lot. I've lived on 3 different countries, and I had my fair share of studying as well. I got the CFA, the CTP, so I'm really happy now to share what I know with corporates and have them have better Treasury teams.
And what's your advice around the move into the consulting space? I love the experience you get there, because you've got a breadth of clients that you deal with. What's your advice to people who are wanting to get into that consulting space?
There are certain, there are certain skills that we typically look for. And I think the pace in consulting is fairly quick. So you have to be able to adapt fast. I mean, you go from one meeting to another, one client to another, and having, all sorts of different topics. So it's just really a type of personality that would require for consulting. You have to be super organized. You have to really be a fast learner and really flexible and have a sense of customer service that is really high. So sometimes we see Treasury teams that are not really that people person, and I think as consultants needs to be very technical, we also need to have that skill set to manage different personalities. And trust me, there are different personalities out there. So and I think from a knowledge of knowing Treasury, different areas, and I think technology has been a very big topic. So someone that has that techie side too would also be an asset when you're looking for a consulting work or job.
And you mentioned you've worked in 3 different countries. I always find that being that international citizen really, it teaches you emotional intelligence, because there's small differences between cultures, but they're big things in terms of the work environment. How did you find that?
It is definitely true. Yeah, and even as doing consulting, we have projects with Asia and Europe, and I'm from Brazil, so I do have the Latin side, but then I spent most of my career in North America, and I truly, you need to, again, comes to the flexibility, right? You need to adapt, you need to understand your audience and be respectful. I think there are certain baselines that it serves any culture. So as far as you have these basic skills and be respectful and understand where people are coming from and can listen, I think that's really all that comes to.
And Priscilla, we've got you on today to really talk around health checks within the Treasury Management System space. So what is a health check within the TMS space?
Yeah, we named health check because it's very similar when you go to the doctor, right? It's like, well, I'm getting old. There's something wrong here. Can you please tell me what's wrong with me, right? So that's what we do on the health check. So we have a structured process to review how companies are using their treasury technology, and also identify areas of improvement. So how we're using it, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a problem with the technology. It could be your process. So we kind of marry the two, analyze both, and say, okay, well, where is a process improvement and where is a technology improvement that needs to happen? So that's the health check.
So Priscilla, that begs the question then, what are some of the common inefficiencies, and how can Treasury staffs go about identifying the inefficiencies?
Yeah, there are some very notorious one, which, too much paper around, too many emails. The one that really drives me crazy is people requesting payments via email in 2020. You cannot do that anymore, right? It's very risky. There's a lot of Excel. So sometimes you open a file, it takes about 5 minutes to open the file just because how heavy that is. The one thing that is not necessarily a bad process, but it kind of affects the use of technology, is staff turnover. And as you lose someone that was more knowledgeable in the system, you lose, that goes with the person, right? As much as they're willing to share knowledge, I think having that understanding of the system is also a key. And then it does cause inefficiencies because you end up doing what you were told to do rather than thinking through it and improving the activity.
That makes sense. And you had mentioned this partially because of turnover, partially because of inefficiencies within the system, but how can the process inefficiencies translate into a lack of control within a treasury environment?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Something that it goes really, people don't realize, right? What the inefficiencies and the control problems that they're getting into. So I said earlier about asking a payment via email, right? So that's a big no-no, and I really hope that the audience here knows that they shouldn't be doing that anymore. But I think outside from this basic one is really audit trail, right? So and centralizing that. So one, auditors can do their job. Second, you can always trace back if something went wrong. It's not uncommon to see clients with several bank portals, right? So it's really hard for a system administrator to manage the access and who is active, who is not active, who is still in the company, who left the firm. So all that needs to be centralized. So not leveraging your technology to have the proper controls, that's a big problem. And one that is not much related to fraud, but it's also a risk, is relying in Excel to make financial decisions, which I know most people do, but as I said, you have a very heavy file with hundreds of formulas. You're dragging data and trying to get it right. And then at the end of the day, you're making some financial decisions, either for hedging or liquidity, and then the numbers are wrong. So again, there is technology. There are things you can be doing to avoid these human errors that can cause financial loss.
So yeah, that's a perfect segue. For our listeners, those that are on live and listening via YouTube or the podcast, what would you suggest in terms of a few best practice kind of processes around a TMS?
Right. So this one I can go on and on because that's what I like to talk about. So I would closing a few different topics, but I'm really happy to take questions on different areas as well. So for me, what is a best practice, right? Like, what is best practice? People talk about it's almost those words that people throw in the air, and what that really is. And I think different people would have different interpretations, to be honest. But for me, like when I'm implementing or advising on something, it needs to be simple, it needs to be scalable, and needs to have the minimal manual intervention as possible. So that's typically what I go by, and that's how we build any processes. You cannot build something that fits only a small portion of your population, and then everything else is just different. So it needs to be coordinated, right? So something that I see is like multinationals that have one process for the US, one process for APAC, one process for Europe. Bring it all together. Let's see what are the commonalities, right, that you can do. So make it simple, make it scalable, make it work for everyone. But I think examples that I would like to mention, and that's very related to treasury technology, is one is around cash and cash visibility. So going into different bank portals just to get your balance for the day, that's really a big waste of time, right? So nowadays, TMSs are not that expensive anymore. You have a range of products out there that would fit any company. So, there are all ranges of prices and subscriptions and modules that you can get. But there are some basics that I really think that everybody should have access to. And that main one is really cash visibility. So there are sometimes you cannot, there are certain markets, certain banks that they don't have that technology. But I would say you should put at least 90% of your cash visibility of your full population of bank accounts for you to have access at one click in the morning. So that's cash. Second one, cash forecasting. There is so much the TMS have evolved, and not even only TMS, there are other technologies that do have analytics for forecasting, for workflow, that you don't need to have all those formulas in Excel. Plus TMSs have variance analysis, calculation, and beautiful BI reports that, it's all done for you. You really don't have to be spending time crunching numbers. So again, that's the evolution, right? So most companies that have a TMS have those tools, and they probably don't even use it. That's what I see the biggest pitfall is around forecasting. Now going to payments, and that doesn't necessarily need to be restricted to treasury payments. It could be accounts payable. Multiple bank platforms. Again, why, right? So why would you do that? Centralize, manage your controls, have everything in one spot or fewer spots, right? Sometimes it's not cost efficient to have all your payment banks into the TMS or connect to all your payment banks. But balancing the cost efficiency and having fewer banks that you have to log in and manage controls. Fourth, and I think that's really the easy one, but is the one that I see every single time that I do a health check. It's stale data in the TMS. Accounts closed that they're still open. Signatories that left the company 10 years ago, they're still there as a signatory. Account groups that you're thinking you're looking at a report with certain accounts, and it just really, you're missing half of the ball. So it's just things that are easy. They're low-hanging fruits, but people are just really, you hit the postpone button, like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. But having bad data in the system is just really a recipe for disaster, and it's a very easy one to fix.
Excellent. We've had a couple of questions come in from the live listeners. And so one was from Tony, and he said, what tips do you have for implementing SunGuard Integra?
Integrity.
Yeah,
Integrity is also a very popular TMS out there. I think there is definitely best practices around project management, right? So creating your design, understanding your needs. Don't do a lift and shift. Try to see how can you make it better? How can you use technology on your side, and have proper project governance around your implementation.
Implementation.
And I'm happy to get into more details around integrity. If there are different questions that Tony you have, please ping me offline. I'm in the group. Send me a note.
Priscila, my understanding, and again, we're not technical here, but planning seems to be the key thing around an implementation, right? It's all project management, making sure it's understanding the processes up front and then planning efficiently for the process. And I think that's regardless of whether it's Integrity or any other TMS. Would I be right?
Right. That's correct. I mean, best practices around processes and implementation are the same. I mean, different systems would have different strengths, or you may have different modules, but any best practice should be applicable across any TMS implementation.
Another question came in from Jim. Says, we're looking at putting in a TMS. What is a back of the envelope estimate should I use for implementation and then ongoing expenses?
Well, it's very broad. That number can go from A to Z, but what I think you should consider that it would be subscription cost. For the most part, I think there are TMSs that are SaaS and there's TMS that are hosted. If we're talking SaaS, which is really the most popular ones right now, if you think about Integrity, Kyriba, G-Treasury, Treasury Express, so they're all mostly subscription-based. So you would have an annual cost, and then you have implementation, one-time implementation up front. But in terms of price, it really varies what you're trying to get out of the system. It's very granular, what the number of users or the modules that you're looking for. But again, I'm happy to take offline if I'm happy to share more.
And he had a follow-up question, just how important is engaging an advisor to help implement a TMS versus relying on vendor to get you up and running?
The benefit of getting an advisor is really, I mean, if you get an advisor that knows and have done this before, I mean, you're gonna get better better design, better fit to your needs, and probably better rates too, because the companies that do the vendor evaluation, I mean, I can speak for Actualize. We know the vendors, we talk to them every day, right? So we know where they're BSing or not. So and also we know the weakness and strengths of each system. So we can better help the negotiation process and understand what's the better fit for the company. And it's harder because when you do looking just with the vendor, obviously they have an interest to just, sell their fish, but.
Awesome. We got, and thank you everybody. These are great questions coming through here. Oscar asked, how can we make sure our TMS and staff are prepared, protected against cyber fraud and phishing threats?
Yep. So there is always on the TMSs, you have probably a central administration component, right? So I think it's really worth it either getting some professional services from the company to at least review, or advisors to review your processes. When we do the implementation, we do tests, right? So we do all sorts of tests and try to break the system. That's really the easiest way he can probably do himself. Try to do something that, you know, it would be against your policies. Ideally do that in sandbox, not in production. But I think ask your account manager in the TMS, say, I would like to have a review to make sure I have the best and my system is locked down properly against cyber fraud.
Excellent. And another one coming in from a city. What are the indicators that we should take into consideration to evaluate the efficiency of a TMS comparing it to others?
Yeah, so what we use, we go module by module, and we do a comparison of how is the industry using. You know, people get educated. There's so much information out there in terms of how you should use a TMS. Their demos, right? So I'll give an example. Kariba has webinars, and they always showing what the system can do. So if you compare what you have versus what they're showing, and there is a big gap, you know, that's probably an indicator. But how do we do a comparison how the peers are using the system, and also how the module is implemented in terms of configuration. So if you might have a bad process, and that has nothing to do with the technology, right? So we do an assessment of how the processes are, and also the technology configuration per module, per function.
Excellent.
Is there anything the community could do on their own if they do identify an inefficiency? How should they address it before saying, "Hey, I'm calling Priscila and Actualize"? What can they do on their own before they're giving you guys a call?
Yeah, I think that comes with really observation and education, right? I mentioned, like, if you're looking at a webinar and people talk about things that you have no idea, right? So maybe ask questions, educate yourself on how the Treasury community is managing the system. But I think and as I would say, probably 70% of that is common sense, right? So if you see you're doing a lot of paper, everything is outside of the system, you're doing a lot of Excel, there might be something wrong. So what I would suggest to do is, like, take your processes, right? Let's say cash positioning. How am I doing my cash positioning? Am I looking at balances in the bank portal, or I'm using my TMS? All right, so I'm using my TMS. Do I have the information at the time that I need? So let's say I make my final decisions for the day around noon. Do I have a refreshed feed? And do I have the latest numbers to make my assumptions? So just go process by process and see where the gap is, and take note of that. And then after that, you should really rank and prioritize. So what are the items that fall under the risk bucket? Say, okay, well, I'm wide open for a fraud here. Or what are the things that, okay, this is going to save me tons of time, and versus, okay, well, this is a nice to have, but, you know, it's not priority. Just really get organized, prioritize, show that to your manager or your team, and discuss and make it a project. A lot of that you can do internally without consulting, but there are certain aspects that it becomes a bit more elaborated, and even you need to reach out to different parties, and you need to change the setup of the system, the configuration, then you probably need additional help.
Excellent. Another one came in from Oscar. He said, recommendation on cloud versus in-house servers. What are the pros and cons there?
For a TMS, I mean, I see really the tendency has been cloud. It's very much driven by the company's internal IT policies and their CISO, the cybersecurity officer. What I've seen is just really a big tendency of doing SaaS. One, for a lot less maintenance, a lot less IT requirement from the company, a lot cheaper. And then you really outsourcing all that noise and all that trouble, all that responsibility. You make it, you outsource that to the vendor, and obviously the vendor having hundreds, thousands of clients that they're responsible for, their controls have to be a lot more strict than you might even have in-house. So you're just really benefiting on a SaaS platform from all those controls and security that the vendor is obligated to have, otherwise they wouldn't be selling their product.
And Oscar, on that, I think the other thing that, I mean, we see it from our perspective is the industry's going down the SaaS space. Like the number of people that have treasury management, systems people now has, in the last 3 years, it's dropped dramatically. So I think you're going to find the vendors are all going to push you that way eventually anyway. So I would seriously look at it now, because the challenge you're going to have is finding talent to manage it internally, because they've all gone to the vendors.
And that's also a good point, Simon, because I've seen those hosted that they're just really stopped service, stopped offering, then you just really kind of, quote unquote stuck with that system, and you're not progressing. You don't have the upgrades as you need to. You don't have the latest and greatest, and every time you need an upgrade is a big headache and things like that. So it's really outsourcing that drama of managing the IT and all the setup around that, the servers and all.
All of the headaches go, well, not they all go away, but the management side of them do.
Yep.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions we have that have come in from the group. Thank you everybody for interacting, and Priscilla, has been phenomenal information that you've delivered today. Does anybody else on here have any final thoughts or questions?
If you don't mind, here we go. Now we're all going to talk over each other. Donnie, we know we have to.
Oh yeah, Joe, do you have any final thoughts and questions, Joe?
You mentioned that you have both the CTP and the CFA. This is way off of TMS, but what was what's your thought on the continuing education and the certificates there, or the certifications there? That was a question that actually came up in the community earlier this week.
If I told you I was not a good student until about 20-year-old, and then something hit. No, what happened is at CPPIB, we were very heavy in the investment industry, right? We had a public markets, private equity, and real estate teams, and that was all about investment. So I'm a very curious and probably an eternal learner person, and I just felt that I needed to, know more. It was just really eager for learning and understanding. And then I started the CFA, but it's a really hard one, very much more compared than the CTP. And once I started, I was like, I'm not stopping now until I get it. But it did, honestly, I think for the fact that I changed countries and I was really new here, and it's hard to start from scratch and without networking. Having those certifications really helped me, bumped my resume, had recruiters more interested in talking to me. I think I really only benefited from, I think the CFA has a lot harder stamp than the CTP, but the CTP in this treasury community is very important too.
Makes sense.
Scotty?
No, I'm great. Thanks.
Simon?
I'm pretty good now as well. I lost my train of thought with where I was going with that, Priscilla. But thank you very much for coming on. That's really informative. You probably don't realise, but the four of us are not technical at all. So a lot of what you talked about was way over our heads. But yeah, it's still always good to hear it, because we know that our community likes to know about it.
Perfect. Well, I'm available to answer any questions offline. I'm in the community now. You can find me, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. And for everybody else, we will be back next Wednesday for another topic. Do we have that decided yet, Joe?
Business cases and return on investment for headcount on your treasury team.
Bang, we're prepared.
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Well, everyone make sure to tune in next week. Priscila, again, thank you so much for your time and dropping so much value to the group today. We really appreciate it. And everybody else, we'll see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.